Victor Gao is joining us now from Beijing. He's Vice President at the Center for China and Globalization. He's also a former Chinese Foreign Service officer. Very good to have you with us again, Al Jazeera. I want to talk to you about the trade element first of all. Antony Blinken there had been saying that China's trade was driven by overproduction and was for goods that were heavily subsidized around the world. He said that that in turn pushed out local industries from countries around the globe. If there is to be some sort of level playing field between China and the rest of the world, is this an issue that China would be willing to address?
I think Secretary of State Blinken is completely off remark in saying this. Why? If he talks about the EV revolution, yes, indeed, China is leading the EV revolution in the world. And last year, about 1/3 of the cars that China produced were EV cars. However, when you talk about overcapacity, there is no overcapacity because, as I mentioned, EV production is only about 1/3. The goal is to go up to 50%, eventually up to 100% for China. In the world, the EV production is even smaller a percentage and need to go up much more so. Now, the United States is actually thinking that China has a lead and they do not want to buy EV cars produced in China. So they put a label of overproduction for China. This is completely inaccurate. It does not reflect the situation on the ground. As a matter of fact, if the United States automobile industry wants to be sustainable, they need to make this leap of faith from continuing with the fuel car to changing to the EV revolution, because the EV is the cars of the future, whereas the fuel car is the car of the past. Therefore, China will be completely willing and happy to cooperate with the United States in helping the United States to make that transition from the fuel car to the EV car, and both China and the United States will be winners rather than both losers of this revolution.
When he was speaking in remarks after the meeting with President Xi Jinping, Antony Blinken was acknowledging the level of influence that China has around the world in the Middle East, but also, of course, with Russia as well. He referred to the fact that China was one of the top suppliers to Russia of, as he described it, dual-use products, which are machine tools and electronic equipment, microelectronics and so on. In the event of trying to foster a good relationship with not just the US, but the rest of the world, would it be in China's interests to re-examine whether or not it should be supplying quite so much of that kind of material to Russia?
Allow me to make several points. One is that China and Russia are neighboring countries. We share a border of 4,300 kilometers long. Right now, it is an armed border, and this is a stabilizing factor for peace and stability on the Eurasian continent as a whole. Secondly, no country has a right to disrupt the normal relations between China and Russia and Russia do trade with each other on equal terms for mutual benefit. Now, if the United States has any real evidence of China supplying weapons to Russia, come up with the evidence. On the other hand, if you single out the so-called dual-use goods, I remember when Deng Xiaoping was meeting with a visiting leader from the United States in the 1980s, he said, "You keep selling wheat to China. Don't forget that wheat can be consumed by the PLA soldiers. So you should label it as a dual-use good." Now, if you call dual-use, anything and everything can be used for dual-use purposes, and you cannot use that allegation to prove or try to allege that China sells weapons to Russia. Therefore, we need to separate the normal business relations between China and Russia on the one hand, and wholesale sale of weapons by China to Russia, which is not happening. It is completely different from the U.S. sales of weapons or supply of weapons and money to Ukraine. Philosophically, the only right thing to end the war in Ukraine is through peace and negotiation, to achieve ceasefire, to bring the war to an end as quickly as possible so that more civilians in Ukraine can be saved. That needs the cooperation between China and the United States. If U.S. keeps selling weapons, supplying weapons to Ukraine in the hope that Ukraine can defeat Russia, it may never happen. Russia has endless resources to keep on with the war in Ukraine, And it is time for Ukraine and Russia to come to the negotiation table to talk about peace rather than the continuation of war. I think history will mark China on the right side of history for calling for peace, calling for ceasefire, and the United States probably will be on the wrong side of history because it keeps supplying weapons to one side of the war in order to prolong the war and to use Ukraine as a proxy of someone else.
Victor Gao, we appreciate you being with us on Al Jazeera. So thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Bye-bye.